I was convinced that my car had just been stolen. I was in my early 20s, working in Los Angeles as a production assistant on a huge project, and I was in serious trouble. I was miles away from the production office. I was staring at the spot where I swore I parked my car. My production manager was calling me, asking me where the hell I was. I was convinced I was about to be fired. I would never work in the entertainment industry again, and I would be evicted from my tiny apartment because I certainly wouldn't be able to pay my rent, and I would end up in a sleeping bag underneath the nearest freeway. It was an emotion-charged moment that I won't be forgetting anytime soon. Spoiler alert, nobody stole my car. I just forgot where I parked it, which frankly was almost worse. These kind of moments happen for all of us in our lives, and they can also happen for our audience and our content creation too. Creating memorable moments is a powerful way to build connection between you and your audience. And here's the good news. You don't have to lose your car, get fired, or end up homeless to do it. Welcome to the Story Greenlight podcast, where we're all about empowering creators like you to tell your stories, connect with your audience, and create the impact that you were put on this planet to make. My name is Jeff Bartsch. I'm a coach, author, and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience shaping content for ABC, NBC, Universal, Disney, Apple, and a whole bunch of others. My team and I support creators with followings in the hundreds to the many millions. At Story Greenlight, we believe that you matter, your message matters, and the world needs to hear what you have to say. Alrighty, welcome back to part 2 of creating memorable moments. Moments that cut through all of the noise and distractions and actually get the attention of our audiences. Maybe to the point that they remember seeing the piece in the first place. And maybe, every once in a while, a moment that you shape stays in the hearts and minds of your audience, and they remember you or your work for years to come. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, definitely do that first, because it's the setup for everything we're talking about here in part 2. And there's a lot to dig into, so buckle up. Now, one of the big takeaways from part 1 is that our brains are absolutely blasted with information every single second. And the only way that our brains can even make sense of the world at all is to ignore virtually everything. So in order to get through the attentional filters of our audience's brains, we got to give them something that their brains automatically respond to. Now, according to science, one of those things is emotion-driven content, or something that brings an emotional response. Not something boring, not something regular or neutral, but something that sticks out. And this is how we end up remembering things in terms of content we consume or in moments that we live in our lives. Like the time I was standing in a parking structure in Burbank, California, convinced that my car had been stolen. The year was 2000. I was working as a production assistant at Dick Clark Communications, which was a division of Dick Clark's larger company, Dick Clark Productions, that did all of his film and TV work. Dick Clark Communications did high-end corporate work. So they did huge projects, like they turned an entire airplane hangar in Seattle into a sound stage, into a sound and light stage for Boeing when they decided to unveil one of their new airplanes. That's the kind of stuff that Dick Clark Communications did. They were based out of Burbank, and when I was working on projects there were plenty of regular days that I don't remember them hardly at all. I do remember that I got to know LA and Santa Monica and Hollywood. I would drive all over the place, putting hundreds of miles of city driving on my car on any given week. But they were pretty average, unremarkable days just in general. Now, some days were really cool. There was one day we were doing an event happening in the middle of Hollywood for Marvel Comics. And this is right around the time when the idea of streaming content online was a completely new thing. And Stan Lee, the founder of Marvel, had this idea that he was going to launch a website that had streaming comics on it. And so there was this big flashy launch for this in the middle of Hollywood, bunch of Marvel-related stars showed up. Lou Ferrigno showed up. He was the original Incredible Hulk. And Dean Cain showed up. He was the star. He was Superman in The Adventures of Lois Clark and Superman. I think that's the title. Something like that. Anyway, Dean Cain was there. Some other cool folks were there. And it was a long day. The event went off well, and I was on the production crew cleaning up everything after all the people had gone home and we were striking the set, taking everything back to the office. At the end of the day, my production manager sent me home with an entire flat full of Coca-Cola, a whole flat full of Coke. And he said, "You want this?" I said, "Why, yes, I do." And that was pretty cool. And I'm no biologist, but I'm pretty sure that at that point, my brain was dropping all sorts of oxytocin and happy drugs, and I was feeling appreciated, and I was happy, and I remember that moment for sure. Now, why I would ever get excited about having all that much soda to myself is kind of mind-blowing to me now, given the ways that my health and diet habits have changed over the years, but that's a whole other story. So that was a good day. A lot of other days, I didn't remember at all. But other days, I definitely remember. There was a day when I was sent out to get lunch for the office. I went to the Burbank Town Center, overlooking the 5 freeway in Burbank. I parked in the mall parking structure. I was looking for the certain restaurant, went into the mall. Turns out that restaurant was not actually in the mall at all. It was about half a mile away. And I was going, okay, this is probably not a good idea for me to try to walk all that way, get all these bags of food, and bring them back to my car. So I went back looking for my car. Do you think I could find my car? Oh, I went back to the parking structure, and I could not, for the life of me, find my car. And this was before smartphones. This was before GPS and return to parked car. I mean, I didn't even have a clicker on a remote keychain thing where I could click it and try to open up the car, because my car that I was driving was so old it didn't even have that. I was in trouble. I kept looking and I kept looking and I kept looking, and I could not find the car. And what made things worse was that this mall had 3 different wings of their parking structure that all had multiple levels, and they all looked the same. And I'd gotten turned around. I could not find my car. Not only that, 30 people were waiting for lunch. They were waiting on me to get their lunch. I was convinced I was going to be fired. I would never work for that company again. And I would have no way home. And I would have to end up, everything was just going to be terrible and horrible. I'd have to sleep in a cardboard box, all the things. Again, not a biologist, but from what I've learned since then, my brain was dumping chemicals in my body like crazy. I mean, a good amount of adrenaline from my adrenal glands and cortisol all through my blood. And then I found where I actually parked my car. Not my brightest moment. Please believe I remember that incident to this very day. This is what happens in our lives from day to day. The younger that we are, the more new and novel things that come up and surprise us. And there's a surprise around every corner. This is why we end up having so many fundamentally memorable experiences in our younger years. The older that we get, the more days that we live that are a lot like the ones before. And so the days start blurring together until it's hard to remember a lot of them specifically at all, unless something unusual sticks out. Same thing with content creation. There's so much of it out there that most of it blends together until something sticks out and connects with you as the audience. Now, this is where you could make the case of creating content that's doing something outrageous. So something over the top crazy, as in pretty much anything that Mr. Beast has ever done or is doing. So Since most of us won't be giving away Lamborghinis or filling people's houses up with slime, the question is, what is something that's workable for everyone here? Well, when it comes to creating, not only is it not an exact science in terms of saying this is something that will work every time for every person, no matter what, it is not even close to that. Anything that involves lots of different kinds of content with lots of different people, you're going to have a spread of reactions. But the thing that we do all have is thoughts and feelings. And if, as the smart science folks said in part 1, if we can tap into emotion-driven content, we have a far better chance of getting through to our crowd, even if our content is information-based or doesn't seem to lend itself to emotion or storytelling. It is possible. And what I'd like to do is break down some examples of emotion-driven content and why certain moments stuck in my mind as a viewer. Then I'll follow that up with some more examples of emotion-driven content and why certain moments stuck in my mind as a content creator and as a viewer. Then I will follow up with some steps to increase the possibility of that happening for you. Now, always remember, since our brains are attracted to emotion-driven content, we can lean on that. But at the same time, emotional content is ultimately decided by the viewer, who they are, and even how they're feeling at that very moment. So because of this, it's not enough to create content that you think is emotion-driven. You have to know your crowd. You have to lean into things that you know that they will connect with. When people hear that I do broadcast TV editing, usually the first thing they want to ask is, oh, what kind of shows have you worked on? Now, here in the US, the credit that most people are likely to know is a show on NBC called American Ninja Warrior. And it's known for constantly creating memorable moments. And it's not happening just on TV either. I mean, this show has transcended television to literally become a cultural movement. There are ninja gyms that have popped up all across the country. There are an entire generation of kids who have grown up watching the show, and now they're competing on it, and they are kicking the grown-ups' tails all across the course. It's kind of crazy to see it happening. We've heard stories after stories of families bonding together watching the show, going out and doing physical activity together, maybe building a ninja rig in their backyard, and turning their lives around from sitting on the couch to being healthy and active, all kinds of super healthy, positive things. And that is just the surface of the transformations. We're going to talk about that more in a second. The show actually started as a sports competition show in Japan in 1997. The show is called Sasuke. If you look it up, it's actually spelled S-A-S-U-K-E, but it's pronounced Sasuke. It took me a while to figure that out. And in Japan, it is a 3-hour special, most of the time, that airs once or twice a year, and it has aired for 40 cycles. 40 seasons of this show, 40 rounds of the competition. And what it is, Sasuke is a massive multi-stage obstacle course that gets harder and harder with each stage. And the goal is to reach the top of this massive tower that people refer to as Mount Midoriyama. There are thousands of competitors that have appeared on the Japanese version of the show over the years, and only a handful of people have ever even completed the course. The show is so popular, it's been licensed in 18 other countries as Ninja Warrior. So Ninja Warrior UK, Ninja Warrior Germany, Ninja Warrior Bahrain, you name it. Now, the format here in US is called American Ninja Warrior, and it started airing in 2009 on a tiny cable channel called G4. It proceeded to become G4's top-rated show, and very soon, even in spite of that, G4 just the channel itself disappeared, it got shut down, and Ninja transitioned to airing on NBC, where it's been ever since. Now, I joined the editing team for Ninja in 2014 for season 6, and I've been with the show ever since. As of this recording, we're just about to roll into season 14, so this will be my 9th season with the show. In terms of American Ninja Warrior, which we just, most of us on the show just call it Ninja for short, it started as a niche athletic competition show, popular with fans of Sasuke and people who were into the whole obstacle course racing kind of a thing. It got more and more popular when it transitioned to NBC, and when that happened, the producers saw this happening and the network executives were saying, okay, how can we make this more accessible to a broader audience? So what did they do? They started telling the stories of the athletes. So instead of just being an athletic competition show where you show every single run, you show every single competitor getting on the course and seeing how far they can go, they modeled the format that was put into place by NBC's coverage of the Summer and Winter Olympic Games. They used host commentary and story packages to talk about the stories of the athletes themselves. So the first part of this was they started shaping the commentary of the hosts. Now, if you're familiar with the show, you'll know that the hosts of Ninja, the two primary hosts, Matt Eisman and Akbar Gabajamila, they're constantly dropping references to who the people are, why they're there, what's been happening in their lives, and what it would mean for them to finish the course and all that sort of a thing. Even before the athletes set foot on the course, most of the time what you're going to see is a biographical story package. And that's where you have a piece that shows the stories from the athletes themselves, and you hear from their friends and family. Sometimes you get to see the athlete back in their home, where they're from, doing their thing, whatever makes them unique, all that sort of thing. And the whole show is heavily weighted towards helping the audience understand who the athletes are and why what they're doing is so incredible. In terms of creating memorable moments, the show itself is memorable because it is a spectacle. It is a monstrous obstacle course that's almost impossible to complete. So the show stands out all by itself just by what it is on the surface. But it's not enough to be a TV show with a crazy obstacle course. I mean, there have been plenty other shows like that, but no other US TV show that I know of has the spectacle and the staying power that Ninja has. The thing that puts it over the edge is the other part that we discussed in part 1 of how to create memorable moments. It's the emotion-driven element of the show. It's the human side of the athletes, the stories and the human emotion that's attached to all of that. And that's what I've been doing with the show for the last 9 seasons. I'm one of the editors at Ninja who set the stage for the competitors to appear on the show by editing those story packages, telling their stories. And those pieces usually, most of the times they're going to run about 1.5 minutes. Sometimes if it's a really quick thing, it just runs for 30 seconds and then it's done. And if it's a super heavy story, then it might run up to 2 minutes, but that's rare. If you don't know who the person is who's trying to get through this obstacle course, you don't care if they make it or not. If you don't know who an athlete is, the audience won't care how the athlete performs. That's the most basic level. Just think about the Olympics, the Summer and Winter Olympics coverage. US viewing audiences are notorious for not caring about athletes that aren't from the US. So even just seeing a graphic at the bottom saying athlete X from the United States, a US viewer is instantly more interested and connected to that athlete because of that nation of origin commonality. But if you show a profile piece of that US athlete, now a US viewer is far more likely to actually care about that athlete on an emotional level. And it's the same at Ninja, except all the competitors are from the US pretty much. And you have to explain the story of who they are to differentiate all these people from each other, never mind just to make the audience care about what happens. So if you go on social media, there's always going to be a crowd of people saying, enough with the lame story pieces, just show us what happens on the course. Who's editing these shows? They should show more runs of, more people being on the course. And the fact of the matter is, it's just a really good thing that those people aren't running the show. The folks who run the show are really good at what they're doing, and they've been doing this for a long time. They know how to strike that balance. Looking at this with our creator hats, how does American Ninja Warrior consistently create memorable moments on the show? To fully explain this involves a whole conversation that goes beyond the scope of this episode, and it requires input from people with more direction over the show than what I have. Now, for our purposes here, I'm going to focus down on the thing with the most direct comparison to content creators on YouTube, the athlete profile pieces, because that's the stuff that I work on. And as we've been saying, the memorable moments that get past the attention filters of our audience's hearts and minds, they require either something unique, emotion-driven, or both. Ninja is both of those. The flip side to creating unique or emotion-driven content is that it's entirely up to the audience as to how things land with them and how things are received. So because of this, any discussion of memorable moments has to begin with the audience and what they want. When you think about who the audience is for American Ninja Warrior, this is an enormous hit television show airing in prime time on the fourth largest television network on the face of the planet. So this is not a niche show. It has wide, broad appeal to all kinds of people, and it has to do that in order to do what it does and to stay on the air. It has a broad appeal, but it especially appeals to families. And even within that, a family show has to keep lots of different kinds of people happy. Parents, kids, aunts, uncles, grandparents, all genders, you name it. So because it's a broad family audience and you have to work really hard to please all kinds of different people, Ninja focuses on broad themes. You can watch the show, you will see these broad themes that appeal to lots of different people. And if you had to talk about what is the theme, the overarching theme of the show, one of them would definitely be the idea of overcoming obstacles. The show itself is based around the show itself is athletes running a crazy course filled with physical obstacles. The people who appear on the show are normal people doing extraordinary things on the course. The thing is, a lot of the times, the obstacles on the course are nothing compared to the obstacles in their own lives. Now, if you've been around Story Greenlight for any amount of time, there should be a huge alarm bell going off in your head. The idea of overcoming obstacles and conflict, kind of a big deal. That is a fundamental part of any story. It's a fundamental part of being human. We are living this. We are encountering obstacles daily in our lives. And so when audiences see ninjas overcoming obstacles on the course and in their lives, it is incredibly inspiring. The idea is, wow, they're overcoming these obstacles, and so can I. It is innately human, and it is innately relatable on a huge, broad scale. Now, if the idea of conflict being a fundamental part of telling any story isn't landing with you, and you haven't heard the episode on how to tell a story, definitely go and listen to episode 007 of this podcast here. It is a must-listen part of what we talk about here at Story Greenlight. Foundational stuff. There will be a link in the show notes for that. And while we're on the subject of other must-listen episodes, episode 10 is where I dig into the idea of the thing under the thing. My work on Ninja was actually what really helped that idea come together in my head in the first place. And the thing under the thing is an incredibly powerful concept, and it is everywhere in Ninja. Even just on the big scale, the overview of what the show is. It's an obstacle course. The obstacle course is the thing. Overcoming obstacles in life is the thing under the thing. The obstacle course represents the challenges that we all encounter in life. And any time we see athletes getting to the end of that course, it ends up promising to us that we too, as viewers, can overcome obstacles in our own lives, just in the same way that that athlete conquered that course. And not only does it work on that big scale, it definitely functions on the individual scale in stories of individual athletes. So let's get specific. American Ninja Warrior has, if you look at the credits, you will see an army of people who work together to make the show happen. So my role specifically is I'm one of the editors who focuses exclusively on the athlete story pieces. The show itself has all kinds of different characters who appear on the show. They work to maintain a balance of all these different kind of folks, of all these different kind of characters. And so the stories that we tell, they range from being goofy and silly and other things where these folks are kicking butt, and it's one of those, whoa, that's pretty badass, that kind of a thing. And there are lots and lots of human stories talking about obstacles, overcoming, facing and overcoming obstacles. And a lot of the pieces that I end up working on are those human pieces where the goal is to either make you laugh or probably more likely to make you get the feels and maybe even cry, if we're lucky. Being on the show for 9 seasons at this point, I did the math, and I've literally cut hundreds of these pieces by now. And whenever you have that many of anything, it's easy for things to start feeling the same. And I'll be the first to admit that not every piece, not every episode of the show is going to stick out in people's minds. And certainly not every story of every athlete is going to stick out in people's minds. A lot of them will feel very similar. It was kind of funny. I was at a cast and crew party at one point with Matt Eisman, one of the hosts of the show. We got talking a little bit, and I introduced myself because, the folks in post-production don't really talk much with production folks, the people on the set. And so I don't interact with Matt or with Akbar or with Zuri or any of those folks much. So we're talking about what our roles were on the show. And he said, "Oh, so you're the guy who puts in the I've Got Cancer piano music in all those pieces." And it was, and I heard that, I thought, well, yeah. And in my defense, there are times when it's easy for these pieces to say, this is something super serious, so we're going to put in super serious music so you will feel this thing. It's easy to go over the top with some of this stuff, especially with music choices. So I've been working to use less piano ever since then to make it less obvious. And when we do this, we have a typical format that any piece goes through. You introduce, here's the character, here's the obstacle that they're facing, here's what happens next. And there's always some kind of a turn in the middle. So it ends talking about here's why I'm here and here's what I want to see happen. And that's your piece. Here's the person, here's what they want, here's what's getting in the way, here's how they're working through it, and here's what they want to see happen. So if I had to pick the most memorable piece that I've cut on the show, it would hands down be the story of Lance Pekus and his wife, Heather, that aired during season 9 of American Ninja Warrior. In a perfect world, I would just play the piece here. But if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, you would miss out on picture, and that would not be cool. That just doesn't work. Plus, it is very definitely copyrighted material, and I don't want to damage my relationship with the show. Plus, with YouTube's bots, with copyright flags for music, I don't want to run afoul of those guys. So I will just describe the piece as things go along. So Lance Pekus is a long-standing character on the show. He is known as the Cowboy Ninja. He is a cattle rancher, farmer in Idaho. He builds obstacles on his farm. He's appeared on the show for 10 seasons, and he usually starts out on the course in a t-shirt, cowboy hat, and jeans. Most of the time, he ends up losing his hat and shirt at some point. The dude is solid muscle with a big grin. He is the classic cowboy image. He fits right into the American Family TV show vibe. Americans love their cowboy stories. So what most people don't know, Lance is married with 2 really young kids, and his wife, Heather, had been fighting health issues for years. They'd kept it private until they decided that they were ready to talk about it, and they were hoping that they would feel less alone and could give some other people some hope who were in the same situation. So the piece where they decided to talk about what was happening with their family, it talks about how Lance and Heather met in college there, and they were super athletic and active, and she taught him how to ride horses, and he's been riding it ever since. And a few years later, she got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She got a medication, and she didn't have any issues for 9 years. Heather was active. She lifted weights and she rode horses and all the things. And in the last couple of years before the piece aired, her MS got really bad, and her body stopped responding to medications. And she went from trying to run to using a walker, and she was barely able to walk. They talk about how hard it is dealing with a disease that doesn't respond to treatment. And Lance says it's hard to see someone that you love just fall apart. And Heather says, I never imagined being in this place. And you just kind of, when you sit in that moment, I mean, that this is where the weight of everything is really sinking in. This is an incredibly challenging thing for them. And she says, but I've always been a positive person, and I want my children to remember me that way. And Lance says, she still works as a high school counselor. She's dedicated to me and the kids. She is the toughest person I know. And Heather says, Lance has been my rock. He's always been on my side. And the piece ends with Lance saying, seeing Heather cheering me on, it's going to mean the world to me. That's the storyline. That's, if you plug that into the master story framework, it's a character who wants something. We always talk about the master story framework of a character who wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences change as a result. So in that framework, Lance and Heather want to live their lives together, but disease is destroying their lives and their future. They fight together. They're growing stronger together, no matter what happens. And so if you had to say what the theme of the story is, it's talking about commitment in the face of loss. One of the reasons that the piece packs such a powerful punch when you see it, one of the reasons is the video and image progression. The images tell and they emphasize the story to the point where you know exactly what's happening. You can understand the story even if you don't hear a single word of what people are saying. It starts out with stills of this couple when they're in their early 20s. You see them running around outside, and you see Heather vaulting up behind her husband on a horse. You see footage of this, and you transition from that to her walking around the kitchen. Then you dissolve to her slowly pushing herself across the kitchen with a walker, struggling to walk at all. And even then, you go from there to a shot of Lance pushing Heather in her walker across their backyard, because she can't even do that. And it goes even a step beyond that to where he picks her up out of her walker and carries her on her back. And so the piece shows a progression of this happy, healthy couple visually progressing to struggling and sad. And Heather talks about what it feels like to have a body that doesn't respond to medication for a disease that you can't stop. And she can barely talk. She's so frustrated. She's so sad. And Lance is doing everything in his power to not break down himself. And of course, cowboys don't show emotion. So, the stereotypical cowboy doesn't get worried or worked up about anything. So the fact that Lance is clearly emotional but he's desperately trying to not show it. Makes it even more powerful. And then visually what happens is, as they're talking about how even though they don't know what's going to happen with this disease, they can't cure it. But what they do have is each other. And there's a shot of this couple walking down a country road with these green open fields spreading as far as you can see. Lance's hand on her back as she struggles to take her next step, leaning on her walker, walking away from the camera. And the last shot is Lance carrying Heather in his arms, walking away from the camera towards an open field. And at that moment, it's not golden. It wasn't shot at golden hour sunset, but it may as well be. I mean, the last shot of the piece is literally a cowboy carrying his woman off into the sunset. The reason that this is so powerful is because it nails so many elements. It stacks up so many elements all at once. So in terms of content that's unique, he is actually a cowboy. You know, there aren't a lot of people who are legitimately cowboys who raise cattle and ride horses and do the roping thing and all the thing. He does all that. And the other thing is, Lance is very good on the show. He's an excellent athlete. He's been an elite level competitor for multiple years now. So not only is the content and the characters unique just by what they are, it's also innately emotion driven. He's a family man. He loves his wife. He loves his kids, his family. I mean, anytime you say the word family, that brings up all sorts of emotions, often positive and often not positive for a lot of people. But I mean, it's an emotionally laden idea. He's a family man. He loves his wife, loves his kids. His family has been a victim of disease through no fault of their own. And for anyone who's with a family who's dealt with disease or health issues, that is instantly relatable. It's emotion driven because there is no fairy tale ending. There aren't any easy answers. The disease isn't going away. But instead of choosing the path of being a victim, of staying a victim, they choose the path of the hero. They choose to keep fighting, and they choose to continue standing by each other. One of the other reasons that the content is so powerful, that it shows this powerful visual progression. You have something, you lose something, you keep fighting and staying together. And I got to say, there's a specific piece that was really, really important at the beginning of there's a shot that was super important at the beginning of that, and it was the shot. It was home footage of Heather jumping up on the back of a horse behind Lance. It showed who she was. It showed how she was in the years before this disease took a hold of her body. And so that clearly showed her starting point physically. And then with the music takes the emotional arc of the piece and it amplifies the whole thing. The instruments are heavily weighted towards organic instruments, acoustic instruments. It starts off, I picked a piece that it's a happy cue, major key. It has a happy accordion and guitar. You know, it's not crazy perky over the top, but it's warm, it's inviting. And then as they start going down the path of saying how this disease started showing up, the music turns darker. There's a soft bass drum pattern that starts in, and there's a harp accompaniment pattern that starts setting things up and turns the mood darker. And the piece itself has gone from the major key in the beginning to the minor key as things start going darker. As things go even darker to the point where they're feeling really despondent, as Heather is sitting there in tears, barely able to talk, and Lance is sitting there talking about what it's like to see your wife in this state. There's the music is a slow solo nylon guitar with a softer, so it's not a bright twangy sound. It's a dark, warm sound of the guitar, and it has this airy synth pad behind it that just kind of, it's this floating kind of ethereal vibe that pushes things even deeper into the struggle. And then as things turn, as the piece turns to, when Heather says, I've never imagined this, but I've always been a positive person and I want my children to remember me this way. That's when the music changes as well. And it goes from the minor key back to the major key. But it doesn't go crazy upbeat. It's not a party, yay, she's cured, because that's not what the story is. It's more of a quiet, this is hard, but we've still got each other. You show that piece, you show Heather watching via FaceTime on the sidelines, and Lance goes out, and he's one of the handful of people to finish that stage of the course, and everyone goes nuts. And warm fuzzies go all over the United States toward the millions of people who watch this. And it is a moment that says, even when life is hard, we can all choose to walk together. And just imagine what's possible when we do. Not only did millions of people see that piece when the show aired, I know that Lance has showed it in a number of his public speaking engagements that he's had since he's been on the show. And that was a memorable moment for sure. Stories like the Athletes on American Ninja Warrior are examples of pieces that are unique and emotionally driven by the nature of the content themselves. Now, and there are multiple layers of why it lands with such an emotional punch with so many people. And that's the way it needs to be for a show like Ninja. That's all about being relatable to a huge range of people. Now, as content creators, we might hear this and feel like this example, these kind of things might feel a bit on the extreme side. And frankly, they are, because most of the time, what we're doing as content creators is not an enormous television show being seen by millions of people. The fact is, though, we all have the chance to create pieces that have that human-driven motivation baked into them, even if the pieces that we make seem like they don't fit with story-driven elements or emotion. And if you're thinking that, well, my stuff isn't story-driven at all, it's all about information in one form or another, and it's not all that exciting, then you definitely need to make sure that you go back and listen to, or go back and re-listen to episode 7 for ideas on how to apply story to information-driven content. There are a lot of creators here at Story Greenlight who are figuring out exactly how to do that. Then there are the memorable moments that happen not just because they're well-crafted moments by the creator, but the viewer latches onto the pieces for the viewer's own reasons. As I mentioned in part 1, science tells us that our brains often shift how and what we remember based on how we're feeling at the time. Now, obviously, this is completely out of our hands as creators, but we do have some measure of control here by creating for a specific audience in the first place and knowing what they want. I'll talk about this more in a bit. For now, I'm going to flip the script a bit here because I'm going to tell you some moments from YouTube content that have stuck out to me as a viewer. If you look at the Story Greenlight channel, you will see that I first set it up in September of 2017. This was on the heel of me having started learning about online business building starting in 2008. I had some false starts, and right around 2015, I got really frustrated and I stopped attempting to do online business completely. I figured out how to pivot what I was doing, and I decided to start a YouTube channel. Kind of fiddled around for a while, and I started looking around for examples of YouTubers, and I found this guy named Peter McKinnon, who did tutorial videos about shooting and editing content on YouTube, and he also did magic tricks. And the first time I saw Peter doing a magic trick, he was doing some card some close-up magic with cards. And I saw him doing that. And I thought, you know what? This guy is a pro. He clearly knows what he's doing, because as an editor, I've actually edited magic shows for broadcast TV. So yes, Peter is a pro with his magic stuff. He made everything look so easy. And when I was first watching Peter McKinnon do his thing, he would make things look so easy. My first response was, well, I can do that too. How hard could it be? Welcome to the sign of someone with no clue of what they're getting into. It turns out that when I was seeing his stuff in 2017, he'd already been doing stuff on YouTube for 7 years, since 2010. He'd been grinding it out for 7 years. The guy has ridiculous chops. He's put in ridiculous amounts of time and practice. Now, one of the trademarks of Peter McKinnon's work, he uses sequences of extended moments, talking about memorable moments. He uses all sorts of techniques to elevate the everyday into something amazing and unique and cinematic. And most people have come to call these sequences in his pieces cinematic sequences. And most of the time, what they involve are high-speed frame rates, usually shooting at 120 frames per second. Physical shooting techniques where you're moving the camera, you might shoot stuff backwards, flipping the camera up and down, expensive lenses, camera stabilizers, all that sort of a thing. Then you have editing techniques that he uses, custom mats, custom wipes, custom editing to the music, and lots of speed ramps, speeding up and slowing down the footage. And this style of creating these extended moments in his pieces, it prompted an entire movement on YouTube of vloggers wanting to be like Peter and put cinematic moments in their pieces. There was a video that Peter did. He and a group of guys went to Iceland in November of 2017, or at least that's when the video dropped. And so they went to Iceland. They went to see this wrecked airplane that was sitting in the middle of nowhere in Iceland. They did some shooting with a mini Rhino slider designed for shooting moving time lapses with your phone, which was the first time I'd ever heard of Rhino and their sliders, since that's who sponsored the video. So well done to Pete with your integration, and hopefully Rhino has sold a ridiculous number of sliders based on your work over the years. So after that scene with the airplane, the video transitions to a 30-second sequence of drones and time-lapse slider footage. These ridiculous outdoor shots in the outdoor wild open nature of Iceland. It absolutely blew my mind. And unlike the piece from Ninja that's owned by NBC and a whole bunch of other people, I'm going to call in fair use laws plus YouTube's culture of crediting other creators' work plus an active subscription to Epidemic Sound, and I'm going to drop a clip of that in right here. Why was this moment in this video such a big deal to me? Well, the number one reason for me was it was aspirational. It was inspiration, because after over 15 years of me sitting in rooms with computers making TV, I was looking for a change. And here's this guy about my age making YouTube videos exploring the world, and it made me feel like I could do that too. That's the first element, conceptually. And then the second reason that this thing landed so hard with me was the music paired with the visuals. It's this female vocal with a pounding synth track. It's this contrast of organic human voice with the computer generated music. And when you think about the thing under the thing of this whole sequence, it was all about nature, exploring, and adventure. It was all about taking your everyday life and making it and turning it into an adventure. All those ideas from Peter, plus all the desires and aspirations sitting inside me, bundled up together in that one 30-second B-roll sequence. And shortly after that, I just started discovering how very good Peter is at a lot of things, and that even though I did and still do have Hollywood level editing chops in my own sphere, I still had a lot to learn about shooting and creating on YouTube. So I sliced me up some Dunning-Kruger style humble pie, and I started down that path that I'm still on to this very day. About 6 months later, I saw another YouTube video that introduced me to another creator by the name of Cody Wanner. In 2018, Cody started a daily vlog, and he got it into his head that he is going to put out a video on YouTube once a day for 365 days in a row. He committed to doing it for a full year. By the time April of 2018 arrived, Cody already had 100 daily vlogs under his belt. So in April 2018, he took a trip from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where he lives, to New York City. He had a chance meeting with Casey Neistat, and that video popped up in suggested videos on YouTube for me. Now, at that time, I was watching videos by Casey Neistat and Peter McKinnon, and I just thought Cody was another one of those guys. Then I noticed that Cody only had about 3,000 subscribers at the time. I was just scratching my head because this guy was really good. The stuff that he was doing was 100% on the level of the things that I was seeing people like Casey and Peter doing. You could tell that he was onto something. So I started watching his daily vlogs, and I thought, man, this guy is doing this at an incredible level every day. There's a lot I can learn here. Plus, his stuff is a lot of fun. That was April of 2018. And in May 2018, Cody dropped a video talking about You Are No Small Creator. He started up a group called No Small Creator. I actually reached out to Cody and we became friends, and I became an original member of the No Small Creator movement. And then lightning struck. Not literally, just conceptually in the good way. Cody kept doing daily vlogs, and a couple of months later, in July of 2018, Cody ends up driving from Pennsylvania up to Toronto to hang out with Peter McKinnon. Peter and Cody do dual collab videos. Peter introduces Cody on his channel to his audience of about somewhere between 2 and 3 million at the time. Cody's channel instantly jumps from 3,000 to 40,000 subscribers in just a few days. Meanwhile, the No Small Creator group was ringside for all this. We got to see all this and hear what Cody was talking about behind the scenes, and it was incredibly inspiring. We're all so stoked for Cody, and for anyone thinking about, man, it really is possible to put in the work and get a break on YouTube. So, in this case, The Thing, on the surface, it was a collab video with a huge YouTuber. The Thing Under the Thing, inspiration. Just imagine what's possible. So this was July of 2018, and Cody's ride kept on flying along. 2 months later, in September, Cody had been invited to present in Belfast, Northern Ireland at the Power of Video conference, and he was going to be talking about his vlogging journey. So here he is. He's surrounded by these huge YouTube creators with millions of subscribers, and these creators all had their jaw on the floor at how Cody was doing this daily vlogging thing at all, never mind at the level of quality that he was doing it. Meanwhile, all of us in the No Small Creator group were just watching his latest vlog in this crazy adventure that Cody was manifesting into existence. And I was back in LA editing pieces like the Lance Pekus story for American Ninja Warrior, loving what I was doing, but also kind of having my mind blown by what was happening with Cody's journey. One day when Cody was in Belfast in September of 2018, he dropped a vlog entitled, "Brew, If You See a Ladder, You Climb," which basically is a title saying, if you see opportunity, jump on it, you never know what will happen. I mean, just the title right there, it says, yes, let's go for it, let's live life, I'll do all the things, you know? And in this video, Cody is traveling around Ireland with YouTubers visiting shooting locations for Game of Thrones. They're shooting archery competitions. They're having mock sword fights shot in slow-mo with great looking footage with all the cameras. And I'm sitting in an edit suite in LA on a dream job cutting story packages for a primetime hit show on the 4th largest television network in the world. And I'm absolutely riveted at what's happening to my friend over in Ireland. At 4 minutes and 41 seconds into this video, which is linked down in the show notes, Cody says,
like, there's plenty of topics. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of topics, but what is the story?
And then he cuts to this montage of nature B-roll, a stream, and slow-mo cutaways of these crazy, well-established YouTubers with millions of subscribers sitting beside this stream thinking, and the sequence just blew my mind.
We got something magical, pretending that nobody knows, trying to hide but it shows. Lost my sense of logical, think that I'm gonna explode, echoes inside of my bones.
YouTube reminded me that I actually left a comment on that video, and it says, the sequence at 4:50 just transported me to another world. Perfect imagery, perfect music, perfect lyric, so stoked for you. There is another comment from Colin and Samir that said, we are absolutely riveted to your channel. What an adventure you're living. And a whole bunch of people hit thumbs up on that comment. So it was pretty much, it was an amazing story being lived out right in front of us. Now, here's the thing. Cody would be the first to say that there were lots more memorable moments in his year of daily vlogging than shooting a sequence of B-roll by a stream in Northern Ireland. Now, was it shot and edited well? Yes, absolutely. Where did the impact come from, though? It came from inside me. And all that story that had been building over the last 6 months. All these evenings of me staring at YouTube videos, watching these YouTubers doing their thing, having a blast, living this crazy adventurous life, building followings of millions, and wondering what was possible for me. Eventually, I realized I'm not here to be Cody Wanner. I'm not here to be Peter McKinnon or Casey Neistat. I'm not here to be them. I'm here to be an upgraded version of me and what I have to offer to the world. And that's pretty much my mission, to help you do the same thing, to be the best upgraded version, the fully realized version of yourself as a creator. The point is, though, no matter how you craft your content, and no matter how well you know your audience, you never fully know where your audience is at any given moment. You never know what's going to connect with them in ways that you never expected. Now, if you let it, that can feel terrifying. If you choose otherwise, it can be liberating. Having said all that, how do you actually do it? How do we purposefully craft content that has a chance of sticking in the hearts and minds of our audience? Well, as a reminder, since our brains are attracted to emotion-driven content, we can lean on that. But at the same time, emotional content is ultimately decided by the viewer, who they are and where they are and how they're feeling in the moment they engage with your content. Because of this, it's not enough to create content that you think is emotion-driven. You have to know your crowd. You have to lean into things that you know they will connect with. So here are 4 ideas to lean on when crafting content that has the possibility of sticking in the hearts and minds of your audience. Number 1, we need to know our audience and what they want. This is not about what we want as creators. This is about leaning into what they want. If your crowd is 20-something vloggers who want to turn their everyday lives into cinematic moments, that crowd will connect with very different things compared to a crowd of first-time parents who are coming to you for information on how to raise their kids in a technology-driven world. Completely different crowd, completely different desires. Number 2, pick the thing under the thing and connect your content to deeper level ideas that your crowd already cares about. If you haven't heard the episode on The Thing Under the Thing and you're wondering what the heck I just said, you definitely need to check that out. It's a full episode and a playlist of its own. Those are down in the show notes. Number 3, shape the story of your piece according to story structure. In the Western world, we have been raised with this story structure our entire lives. We are used to it, we expect it, we crave it, even if we say that we don't. And this, of course, is the master story framework that we talk about. The character who wants something overcomes conflict to get it and experiences transformation as a result. If you boil that down to 3 words, it's desire, conflict, and change. If you have to say it in just 1 word, it's change. Show change. That is what story does. Sometimes you don't even need to do that, though. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end. Even all the intricacies of 3-act structure, ultimately, that boils down to the same thing: beginning, middle, and end. And even beyond that, sometimes it's not, sometimes the piece isn't something where you put a full-blown story structure or even a simple story structure at all. Sometimes it's information with story nuggets dropped in from time to time for extra human connection. Number 4, once you have all that in place, you amplify your existing emotion with music. This is a whole separate discussion. Music is the number one way to amplify or shift any emotion that you have in your content to begin with. Now, I have an entire mini course on music editing with samples and examples and sample files inside the Green Room. So you can join the Green Room to access that, and I'll tell you how to do that in a second. In the meanwhile, I will leave you a playlist of videos in the show notes to help you with your music editing. These are broad strokes of how to set yourself up to create content that sticks in the hearts and minds of your audience. Now, I realize that after all this setup, it might seem that I'm saying, oh, well, you do this, 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 and you just bust it out. And you're saying, what, really? Is it that simple? What? Surely there's more. Yes, there is. This is why storytelling and content creation is so complex. This is why so many people say, it's a gift. You've either got it or you don't. Not true. These are skills. Skills can be learned. These are skills based on the knowledge of how story works, of how the human mind and how the human heart works. Anyone can learn this. A skill can be learned by anyone, and it can be learned by you. Now, does that mean that you have to have a whole bunch of things working together all at the right time to hit the right way at the right moment for the right people? Yeah, pretty much. But that's what we're going for. And it's possible. And when it works, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It is a total rush. And it means that you are connecting, you are truly connecting with your audience when that happens. A couple other thoughts here as we're thinking about this. You need to be realistic and you need to be selective. The vast majority of what we do will not land like an atom bomb in the hearts and minds of our people. That's just reality. That's just the way it is. You can't put a lot of attention on everything. Otherwise, you're probably not going to get much of anything done. If you feel like a certain moment has potential, though, give yourself the opportunity to lean into that moment and make that one moment work. Even if that means just letting some of the other details in other pieces, in other parts of your piece slide compared to focusing on this one moment. Give it a shot. For example, the introduction to this entire episode right here, the version that no one has heard other than yours truly, actually never mentioned the fact that no one ever stole my car. And the serious music played through the entire introduction, and it ended on a really dark note, and it just didn't feel right. It just wasn't quite landing the way I wanted to. I just let it go. I let it sit there and move on. And I'd actually output and uploaded and set the whole episode to go live, done all the things until I finally figured out what the deal was, and that I should go back and shoot some pickup lines, including this one right here. It is frankly kind of a pain to go back and redo that stuff, but for me, it's worth it for that specific moment to be right. When you do this on YouTube, consider leaning towards polishing something towards the front half of the piece, maybe even the introduction. And because a lot of the times the highest impact moment can end up being at the beginning. In television, there are things called the cold open, or sometimes if you're talking in a scripted context, it's previously on, or it's the first section of what you see at the very beginning of any episode. And it functions as getting the audience caught up to speed of either what happened last time, and it's also pitching what's happening this episode, and it's saying, this is what's happening, this is why you should watch the whole thing. And there are times when people will spend, I've had people hire me to spend an entire week cutting 90 seconds of content because it's the cold open, it's the opening section of the piece. So on YouTube, if you build a killer opening that convinces people to watch, then you're better off if you build an amazing moment at the end that most people never see because they didn't get that far. Now, this does have some exceptions. If you think your amazing moment is a 60-second montage of random unrelated B-roll shot at super slow motion, but when you look at your audience retention graphs later on, in the back end of YouTube, and it just drops off a cliff when that montage hits, then that moment is not connecting with your crowd. And you need to rethink things, no matter where it's happening in your piece. Also, sometimes the payoff to a moment only works because of all the setup. It won't land at all if you put it at the beginning a lot of the time. So the punchline to a joke doesn't work without the context. And same thing with an emotion-driven story or a specific moment that you build up to. These are some ideas to get you started. And I know that even giving examples and specific recommendations might not feel like enough, though. Sometimes we need guidance and specific recommendations for our own content. And that's why I actually started our community called The Green Room. It is all about taking these kind of ideas we talk about here, putting them all together in light of the big picture, applying them specifically to your context, to your content. You level up your content, you level up yourself in the process, and we all get to do it in the company of creators who help us get things done. So if you want to try out the Green Room for a month, you can get a full month of access for free. You can get started right now at the link in the description below. I'll see you there.